Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO Jay Feitlinger and no-nonsense COO Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, everybody, welcome to a new episode of Revenue Rewired. So we've got this episode breaking down why CMOs fail and what leadership teams are doing incorrectly, and how to build a marketing structure that actually supports the CMO and drives long-term growth and revenue. Hence the podcast. So, Jay, I'm excited for this one because we have a lot of experience with CMOs in all different facets, but we discussed earlier how we were really going to focus on this one, and it was like the chicken egg situation.
Mm.
And so one of the questions I posed to you where we started this was, what does come first? Do we talk about hiring a CMO first and then they bring in a team? Or is the CMO coming in and then working with an already existing set of individuals? So it's kind of like the foundational question is, what is the best setup for a CMO to come into?
I think this is definitely one of those like Goldilocks scenarios of you want it just right. I have seen, or we have seen numerous times where an organization is extremely strategic, and they hire a chief marketing officer very early on. Obviously, from the positive of that, then they have a good person in place as leading strategy to kind of help direct what the plans are. But if they're really too early, often what happens is they aren't given the resources, the trust, the budget to build out a proper team, either internally or through partnerships to execute. And so now that person is just, they're doing strategy and execution, and it's just too much. And then on the other side, I've seen situations where, like, I worked with a company recently, and my gosh, they're probably 20 years old and well over $100 million in revenue. And now they're thinking about hiring a CMO. And the company is like quite baked. And that person's going to come in and it's going to cause, some issues and ruffling some feathers. So I just think that it comes down to obviously the timing of revenue, the maturity of their organization, and then also from a sales perspective, where they're seeing opportunity. And so a good indication that I've noticed where you do need to start thinking about adding that leadership role, is a couple different factors. One factor I've noticed is that if the current leadership and team in place, none of them really have a strong background in the strategy of building out marketing plans, and really thinking about understanding the brand and the ideal customer profiles and building out the direction of what to focus on and why. That usually is a great indication of realizing that you need that seat on the bus, to really build out the direction of the organization. And so that's probably a really good step. The second, obviously, factor will be is that if they have, marketing people in place, like more mid-level marketing or lower, and just nothing seems like it's working, and or the sales team is really frustrated that they're just getting really poor quality leads and the sales leader can't give good direction to the marketing mid-level person, that also is a really good indication that the problem isn't the marketing tactics. Likely it's the strategy that they're using to leverage those tactics. So that's usually kind of a good indication. Hopefully people listening to that can resonate with maybe where they're at, what season they are with their business. And if either of those kind of challenges are happening, it's really good timing to at least start talking about. I think we're needing to really at least plan for this new role coming in play.
You know, it's actually reminding me of the episode a couple back where we talked about marketing having a seat at the table. And if you're finding like you're having these conversations that just have no end at these like leadership, maybe your quarterly planning or leadership meetings in general, you need to have someone owning that seat at the table because otherwise it's it's kind of just the shotgun tactic. Nobody's really tackling it head on or making any kind of dent in it. It's just being tackled in bits and pieces and it's not going anywhere. And also, there's no one neck to choke kind of thing, either where it's
Or
like,
one
hey,
handshake.
one hand to shake. There's no accountability, I think is really like what
Yeah.
that ultimately is trying to get at.
Exactly. Well, I'm curious from your point of view, obviously kind of similar kind of question, but from an operational point of view, when you're seeing a CEO starting to ask these questions, either, hiring someone, building out their team, is there any kind of unique point of view or thoughts you have around some of that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of CMOs get shade that they're not really treated like a C-suite executive, and it really is. It's not just a glorified doer. It just isn't. You have to have some really good business strategy to make sure that they're super successful. To your point, I would say, if you've got some really great people on your team, but you feel like you're failing them as a leader, whoever's owning, managing them and giving them maybe guidance. If it's not the right person who like gets their world, they're going to feel that. And so it's not going to go anywhere. It's just kind of going to peter out or plateau or maybe even go the wrong direction because they're going to go find someone to give them mentorship and leadership. So if you have a really great team and you want to keep them, I would say then the CMO is probably one of the ways to keep your people. But there's also it's really behooves the ownership to recognize that that person is going to bring a lot of big ideas and they are kind of like naturally going to buck the system. I think that's just the way they think. That's why marketing and sales is constantly at odds as they come about it in a different way, but it's really can they get to the same place strategically, kind of like you and I often will come at a problem completely differently, but ultimately we're trying to solve something together.
I love that. I mean, again, the reason why I asked that question is that I always found that you have a really good view on the human side of things. And where my brain, as you know, often lends to adding the right people to the bus to get to the destination faster and more profitably. And obviously, I very much care about people. I know that without the human factor, that we or our clients will never get where they need to be. But sometimes I don't always kind of think about it from that point of view of just by adding that right person in that role, if the rest of the organization isn't in a good place to accept that role and trust and support that role, that person is going to fail. And so I really kind of love when you have that perspective because it helps kind of ground me to think about it from all sides of the equation.
So thinking about, the first 90 days of a CMO in an age, well, in an organization, and they're basically a change agent if you've never had one before. But we've seen the turnover happen a lot. So I think there's inherently a lot of challenges in general with this role. But what do companies do that you've seen in the first 90 days? It's like, oh, total face palm.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting. I did want to share this because I think it'll give some context to that perspective. Because I do want for those listening to this show, not to think we're only think about this from the perspective of as an agency working with our mid-market size companies or larger that have a CMO in place. But also, I've had the privilege, and it's just such an exciting opportunity where I would say, especially since COVID a lot of organizations are struggling to find the right kind of CMO, and they just can't wait and wait and wait for that person. And so I've been asked a handful of times now to basically be like a fractional CMO role for these organizations. And so that question you're asking me now is making me think about it from that point of view because I'm I always understood what a CMO did. Obviously, we work very closely with them. I've worked with hundreds not maybe not thousands, but hundreds over the 25 years I've done this. But the minute I became that fractional CMO and got, implanted into an organization's leadership team, I saw it from a very different point of view. So to answer your question from that perspective, what one of the organizations that I'm working with right now to support them, one of the things we talked about is that obviously long term they can't have this be a fractional role. And so as I'm helping them think through the strategy and leveling up their organization and alignment with marketing and sales, I'm also building out process and procedures. So when they do go to hire that person, they aren't jumping into a hot mess. And so I would say, first and foremost, the most important thing, which you already kind of alluded to, is that the leadership team needs to be ready, willing, and able not only to bring on this person, but to entrust them and give them autonomous opportunities to do their job. I think it gets really challenging where if the leadership team is thinking, I want to hire a CMO because we aren't getting marketing stuff done, instantly they're thinking about that person being more of a doer and not a strategist. And that I think right there is one huge factor. So step number one, I would say is the leadership team needs to really sit down and look, hard at themselves and in the mirror, and come up with the agreement expectations they have for this role. And likely, I think if they haven't worked with a CMO before, they should chat with other peers in their industry to understand what they've done, good and bad, to help learn from those opportunities and or mistakes. I think the second biggest mistake that I've noticed is again, there is this weird expectation of, okay, I'm going to hire this. I know it's expensive resource, but they're expecting that person to hit the ground running fast and start generating all this opportunity. And it unfortunately just takes time to come in, understand the team, the culture, do a proper audit of the brand, of their assets, all the collateral, understand, from the sales perspective and the ideal customer perspective where they have gaps in all their marketing efforts, everything from their marketing tech stack to collateral and everything in between. I think that that person is going to need some time to really get ingrained in the organization, properly onboarded. What I don't understand is if that clients I spoke in the past, they onboard someone, they're like, oh, it's typically a 90 to 120-day process. I don't understand why this role is expected to be a 30-day process. And I'm just seeing that happening. I'm seeing that happening more and more. I know again that the mindset is this person's been doing this kind of role within my kind of industry for 10, 15 years. So they shouldn't need as much hand holding. But it's like implanting them inside your business and expecting them day one to fully understand all the things. It's just too much and not fair. And so I would say the second part of that mistake that I've noticed early on is that they're just expecting results far too soon and not giving that person a chance to fully embrace the brand and look for opportunities and come back with the recommendations to then get buy-off from the leadership team. Because again, on the third mistake is if the leadership team is washing their hands of this because they don't understand marketing, and then the marketing person goes off for months and does all this amazing stuff, and then the leadership team now comes in and poo-poos that 11th hour, it's really demoralizing. And I've seen that happen again, unfortunately, so many times where someone spends 3 months of building out this amazing strategic plan, to come find out it's not at all what the leadership team wanted. And there's this huge disconnect between them and the team. And it's just not fair, also from that point of view, too.
I'd add two sub things onto that because you and I are super aligned on where we were thinking the opportunities were. And one is you talked about hitting the ground running. And in my head, I was thinking they're typically hired to like execute a big project too. Like we need a blank, a brand, a total rebrand, or, it's new this, and it's a huge undertaking. But it's like they really need to have a super immersive experience in order to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And I would say, I would coach maybe a CEO or whoever's managing them and say, we want to do this project. Can you come in and validate that that's the right direction? And you're giving them the opportunity to make that decision for themselves. Yeah, you've already made it. But if you're going to hire a CMO to do something like that, don't you want to make sure that they're bought off and that they're doing the right stuff? So, also the immersion, you talked about sales collateral and other things like going into and talking to HR. How are you presenting our brand publicly? Like, what's the employee experience or the candidate experience? Maybe there's other opportunities or untapped avenues. Like, it really is so comprehensive. And you're right. If you even, I would say 90 days isn't enough. You need like a full cycle. Like the first 30 days is drinking from a fire hose, your brain is fried. So 30 days, call it maybe a little bit of a wash. You're learning your
Yeah.
computer technology, like the systems, whatever. Then I would say like 120 days before any kind of plan goes into place, unless you're an expert and you've seen it 100 times and you're like, I know exactly how to fix this. Groovy, they made the right choice in hiring you and can hit the ground running faster. But that would be like my sub suggestions is like the project piece and then the immersion into other opportunity areas like, recruiting and, even service operations, like the whole gamut of the business, I would audit.
I love that. Well, I'm curious, Sarah, back to the initial question you asked me about, the chicken egg situation. Again, you have a very unique perspective on this likely, but are there any other, we'll call them red flags? Are there any other red flags that you've seen out there? Again, not that I want to be overly negative here on implying that they shouldn't hire a CMO, but I think that if we don't address both sides of it from the positive and negative side, I think that, again, I think that the organization might be have a rude awakening. So over the years of us working together and working with other agencies and companies and clients and whatnot, are there any flags that you've seen that you want to maybe talk to? I guess back to that question, when they aren't ready to hire a CMO, to be clear.
Yeah, I think one of them I've seen is insidious because it sometimes doesn't occur until after, and you're like, "Ooh, I didn't realize that that was a problem." So, being so absolutely certain, like for example, this is our audience with absolute certainty. You're coming in, and they don't get to know that process, how you came to that conclusion, a little bit of their own understanding and validation. It's kind of like, here's the thing, and this is your person, and this is basically everything that you need to work toward. Having such a confidence in that is great, but there's also, you have to allow them to validate that. Like you would do that with any other C-suite role, really, is saying, this is what I want you to own. Do you agree with this? Like, can you learn a lot about it and fill in what I'm missing? Because you're in such a hurry, I think, when you hire a CMO. You're usually like ready or it's too late. And so I think not giving them the opportunity, which you might not realize until they start bringing up questions, then you're like, oh, shoot, I didn't think this through. And now they're kind of bucking the system and it creates a lot of friction. So the red flag is like, are you prepared to have someone come in and shred it up, tell you you're wrong, show you holes, and be okay with it because you trust them? So it's kind of a personal question, I would say, is a red flag that sometimes doesn't rear its ugly head until it's almost too late.
I think that on that note, then, again, this one company that I'm doing some fractional CMO stuff for, when we're talking about some of these items, it's making the team aware not only from a mentality perspective, like you're talking about here, of what they need to be prepared for and thinking about, but also flipping the coin here because again, similar with marketing, you have to make sure that you're really buttoned up. And so if I was, a CMO considering joining an organization, there would be a bunch of things that I would be looking for. And if they didn't have them in place, it's fine because then it's almost an opportunity if I'm good at those things. But I think there are some key elements that you're alluding to here that if a company is listening to this, they can do some prep work to make sure that they're set up the best light, where they don't want to lose the opportunity with a prospective ideal CMO who's looking at the brand and realizing I don't want to jump into a hornet's nest. You know,
Ugh.
so there's a lot. I think those are the kind of thing I think that the companies need to think about is like put yourself in their shoes and pretend you're going to interview for the organization and the things that you're seeing that are at least low hanging fruit that need to be addressed. And that'd be huge. So, for example, like if I was a prospective CMO of a company, I would want to understand how much that organization cares about their current customers. So, for example, on the B2C side, it is an easy one. If you have online reviews, if I saw, hundreds and hundreds of reviews and not a single engagement from anyone on the leadership team addressing or responding to both the good and the bad, I'd be like, wow, do they even care about their customers? Are they even watching this stuff? How are they learning from it? Some of these things I think are really easy to fix. And I think that there's both sides of the coin to think about when it comes to getting you get yourself mentally ready, but also, tightening up your brand so they don't get distracted with having to do a bunch of low-hanging fruit stuff in their first, 3 months.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The other red flag I would posit here is if you have to be kind of honest with yourself and how your business is growing. So for example, know that marketing is going to bring a certain level of structure to sales. And if you're at the type of growth stage where you need to say yes to every opportunity for like bootstrapping or whatever, sometimes I think a lot of people had to do that post COVID, right? We would just took whatever work we could get. Okay, sometimes things happen, but you end up having to make a decision to pivot back to where you're really good. And I think like being honest with yourself as a leadership team, are we going to say yes to every opportunity? Or are we going to hold fast to the guidelines that the CMO is going to roll out for us that we're all agreed? This is our focus area. This is our audience. This is exactly who we're talking to. Because I think that is a major source of frustration for CMOs where they're like, I did all of this work and you're totally taking a left turn. And I think we could speak from personal experience about this one. So that would be the other one is making sure that you're really honest about where your revenue is coming from and that I think they'd be okay with it as long as you're open with them about it.
Yep, totally agree with that.
All right. Well, we had some really good stuff. That's a juicy topic. If we had to give some tips like really actionable bullet points for some people to make sure that they're successful because it is a super unique role. Again, there's some, COOs are such a unique role because it also is dependent on the CEO. So there's a little bit of personal. I think when C suites come in, you have to match them to the organization, to the person. And so a lot of it is individual. But there are a couple things I think that are stable across the board. What would you say is something that is consistently supportive of a CMO day after day in their role?
Well, a couple things. First and foremost, I think if they treat the CMO, which again has the word chief in the title, and so that should be implied, but again, it's obviously I'm very empathetic to the CMO role, but it blows my mind how I often see the CMO have a less than role on the leadership team. So I think that they have to be treated with equal respect and given the opportunity to really control their destiny. So first and foremost, things like budgeting. You know, the CMO needs to be entrusted with here's a budget tied to here are the goals that we're expecting you to achieve. And that obviously needs to be a conversation, potentially a negotiation, but that needs to be provided. And as long as they have hired the right person, obviously within reason, that person needs to be allowed to control that budget. Now, with that, I think the second part tied to that is I think the leadership team and the CMO need to have a very open conversation about their fears from the leadership, rest of the team side, because what I often have seen is there's expectations that the CMO is also head of sales. And if if they don't have a sales leader in place, then I could see where that easily comes into play. But if the CMO is expected to be fixing a bunch of broken things like how we're talking to prospective customers and closing deals, if they're focusing way too heavily on the sales side and not focusing on the marketing side, I think then you're going to have, this insane catch-up situation going on where you're also going to realize that you've worked through the entire pipeline on the sales side and you fix that problem, but now all of a sudden you killed your entire funnel and you have no leads coming in for the sales team to work on. So now you're playing this crazy catch-up, and as obviously we know, on the strategy side of marketing, it does take some time. So I would think that would be a second big part. And then again, the CMO having an open voice around the goals. Because again, typical leadership team's going to think, okay, we believe the problem is marketing. So we're at a season in our business where we actually can afford and have enough trust and stuff in place to hire a CMO. Let's go ahead and have them join the team and then execute on our plan. But if that CMO had no involvement in creating that plan and they're basically just inheriting something, not really understanding why, again, that's going to be a challenge. And so ideally, as you're setting really big goals, the CMO is involved in those conversations because sometimes the CMO, without having the experience yet working with the company, knowing how about seasonality and lead flow and competitors and all the things of the obstacles of why they aren't getting the leads that they are believing they should, that person's going to need some time to look at the data to understand what they can agree to or not. And so again, if you just say, well, we're going to hire a $200,000 CMO, so we want to add $500,000 minimum from marketing in the next 6 months to cover that person's time plus, margins and whatnot. That seems crazy to me, because there might be some more serious problems in place, not just on the marketing and brand side, but also the sales side, and then potentially the customer service side. I just see so many organizations spending so much money and time on generating opportunities on the lead flow side and don't invest the same amount of opportunity in nurturing and closing and retaining those customers. And so if the marketing's job is just to help bring in leads to backfill lost opportunities because the rest of the organization is a hot mess, then that also freaks me out. And so I would recommend that, that is thought through as well. So when it comes to aligning the leadership team, marketing and sales, looking at, the success metrics, and then again, giving the CMO the opportunity to do the proper onboarding and audit, to kind of build the plan and understand what they need as far as resources and assets go. So, and those resources obviously could be building out more internal team members, and or it could be working with an agency like us.
It's funny too on the metrics piece. I would also caution CEOs to not focus themselves or force vanity metrics in their own businesses. We've talked about that in a past episode, and I think it's kind of like eating your own dog food, as you say, or, taking your own medicine. Okay, like, yes, you're telling your clients not to focus on that as an agency, but also inside the business, don't also then flip the script and say, oh, let's focus on these. And they end up being vanity metrics. Like, no CMO is going to like that. I would add one thing that I was thinking about. I've seen a couple times where CMOs come in and they're really fired up. Like, they're excited about the job. Everyone's so excited to have them. They are ready to tackle some low-hanging fruit. They've got a plan in place. But I would caution them, like we've done with some leadership roles, and say, I know you're not going to like this, but I'm going to slow you down on purpose. I want you to pause and really absorb, because I think what you would propose to me today is going to be a lot different than 60 days from now. So I would say, if you can and you're confident enough, force yourself to force them to slow down just a little bit. Put a little governor on it, because you don't want too much change without change management to really rock the boat if you can afford that. Like, there are some things that probably need to be fixed right away. If you got a hole in your boat and you're sinking, my gosh, yes, fix that. But if you want to be really intentional and set them up for long-term success, and they come in super, super fired up, find a way to focus that energy, but don't let them burn themselves out or create problems for themselves by doing too much too fast. And I know that's so the opposite of probably what a lot of people would say, but I've seen it work for roles that come in with a lot to do.
Yeah, and I think to add to that real fast, one of the thought is, again, speaking from a personal experience, I always love when we add a person or organization or even our clients' leadership team, a person with kind of a different personality set, expertise, role, passion, whatnot, because if you're very open to it, their viewpoints can help you uncover significant opportunities. So I think to that comment you made, I was thinking about that, where if a leadership team that's bringing on a CMO, is ready, willing, able, and they're going to be supportive of this, they actually should welcome people challenging them and making them aware of opportunities. I'm not saying this person is going to come in and be a Debbie Downer. Typically, CMOs are like us; they're half glass full kind of people. But if they come into an organization and they're inheriting, some unfortunately toxic stuff going on that we see happen way too often between the marketing and sales departments, if the marketing team has been blamed all this time for the reason why the company's failing, then this person is going to walk in and they're going to have a freaking target on their backs from day
Hmm.
one. And that can't feel good. They're going to come in with this amazing energy and excitement. about where they're going to see opportunities to make a difference and offer value to the organization. But if they're going to be constantly, hit over the head with here's why we suck and here's why your department sucks and all that negative stuff, what's going to happen is that person just is naturally going to try to protect themselves. And every time you start having questions about the metrics, the leadership team is going to be like, okay, not only do we invest in bringing you on and we gave you extra $1 million of marketing budget or whatever the situation might be, we now need you to get it back to us in the first year, threefold or fivefold or whatever they're going to say. And so that marketing person, if their first couple months is just dealing with trying to addressing internal toxic nonsense because they haven't had this role in place when they should have many years ago, that person is going to start, making excuses likely and pushing down agreement against those metrics and being a lot more conservative because they took a big chance to, leave their past job or even if they weren't working to say yes to this role. And they're probably thinking that they want to stay here for 3 to 5 years, hopefully, maybe more. And so if their initial experience is all negative, it's going to be very short lived, which is probably one of the reasons why we've seen, which just kills me, but we see this role turnover. From my perspective, I'll be curious to get your point of view, but it's one role that I see turning over a lot quicker in organizations than the CTO, the CFO, all the other C's. And I think it might be, again, this weird mentality around what that role is supposed to do. And so my hopes is that, the leadership team, again, would embrace these people with open arms and just start having some really radical candor type conversations so they can be aligned. And again, when problems come up and the CMO brings it to the leadership team to make them aware of an obstacle, they shouldn't immediately point fingers. They should embrace, okay, that's a really good perspective. Never thought about it that way before. Help us understand your thoughts. Do you have any ideas on solutions? And then get aligned and then everyone, walk hand in hand to kind of get towards a destination together. And so they don't feel like they're on an isolated island, which I sadly see happen more often than not.
And I think sadly that happens to a lot of C-suite executives. They are on an island. Like that's kind of what the C-suite is. Like you're floating in the sea on an
Yeah.
island. So you should all be in it together. And Jay, this was a really awesome episode. I would say our wrap up is for CEOs. If you're thinking about bringing a CMO on, ask yourself, are they supposed to be a magician or are you prepared to bring them on? And for marketing leaders, make sure you're stepping into a role where you can succeed and ask the right questions and go in eyes wide open, right? And it's not a quick fix, it's a long term solution. And you definitely want them to succeed. And we want everyone to succeed. So if you have questions or want to know even some more about this topic, email us at podcast@stringcaninteractive.com. And we hope you enjoyed this episode of Revenue Rewired. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.